For those of you who don't know, my name is John Talk. I'm privileged to be the rector here at Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Southern Pines, North Carolina. And I'm also likewise privileged to be the chairperson of the Commission on Constitution and Canons. This meeting, in many regards, will operate as if it were a legislative committee meeting. It is not a legislative committee meeting. We are not having any legislative committee meetings this year. However, it will operate as if it were one. I am super glad to see Chuck Hill here, Mr. Joe Farrell, who is here, who was very, very helpful with these resolutions. And I do not see him, but we might have some questions for Mr. Ed Embry later, especially regarding implementation of some of these resolutions in your local parishes or missions. Before we begin, we're going to pray, then I'm going to set out an agenda, and then we will begin our meeting. The Lord be with you. Gracious God, we thank you for bringing us here this day. We thank you for giving us a passion and mission for leadership in this, the Diocese of North Carolina, and in our individual home parishes and missions. We ask that you give us wisdom today, tonight, that you give us a spirit of discernment as we move into this meeting. Hold us tight this evening, and as you send us home in safety and your love. In your name we pray. Amen. So again, this is going to look a little bit like a legislative committee meeting. As I said, it's not a legislative committee meeting, but we're going to treat it like one. We are going to go through each of the resolutions in turn. Summerlee has just posted a PDF of those of those resolutions in the chat. If you don't happen to have one, a copy, you're welcome to go down and open that PDF. We're probably not going to share our screens with the words as we go through them. Rather, we're going to be able to see each other's faces and have a conversation as we move forward. There are 8 resolutions by my count, and that's true. And I'm not always the best at math. Yes, there's 8 resolutions. So we'll spend about 5 minutes on each. I would like to be done in 1 hour. What I have some suggestions for us. If you have suggestions on how to make these resolutions better and clearer, if you have suggestions about typographical errors or grammatical errors or lack of clarity, I'm going to ask that you send those suggestions directly to Chuck Till. Secretary Till is the secretary of our 205th convention. And in a parliamentary system like we have today, the clerk or the secretary of convention is empowered to make alterations to any resolutions for clarity's sake. So if it's a question about clarity of the resolution, typographical errors, things of that nature, please send them to Chuck. His email address, Chuck, I hope you don't mind if I share it, but it is secdio@zoho.com. And if he's very kind, he might very well put it in the chat box for us all to see later. We also might very well have some questions about implementation. Some of us who are on the committee might be able to give you some general advice. However, implementation questions are clearly going to be in the wheelhouse of the chancellor and or your parish's personal attorneys. Again, we can give you some direction, but we're not going to be able to answer any questions of any specificity for you. If you do have some questions or some modifications to the resolutions that are structural, that make changes, we do want to hear them. We have an opportunity as a committee to make these changes before we go into convention. I believe under the rules of the convention, I'll have the opportunity to make substitute resolutions or to make amendments to the resolutions as they're presented. So we want these things to be right. So your presence here with us tonight is deeply, deeply important. And I want to say thank you very, very much. I have got something on my screen that I need to disappear. Hang on. All right, let's begin. So we're just going to run through these. Some of these are not going to have very many questions. If you do have a question, I am going to ask that you put your name and the title of the question that if you have a question about a specific resolution, let's say you have a question about resolution 205.3, please type in 205.3, and then I would say John, and then we'll call on you, okay? We've got multiple screens, so waving your hands or giving a thumbs up isn't going to do us much good, but if you let us know what your questions are, or even the fact that you have a question about a specific resolution, that would be super fantastic. Deep breath. Resolution 205.1 is a resolution which amends the Constitution to clarify questions of qualifications for a standing committee. As you all came to the Convention 204 the 204th Annual Convention, you would know that we talked about this 2 years ago. This is a resolution that we frankly need to pass or it will fail. We did most of the substantive work on this amendment last year. There were some changes to it before we put it forward for first reading, but it needs to either pass or fail without amendment. If we amend it, it fails. So I'm not seeing any questions about that. Are we all? All right, perfect. 205.2. I'm going to give a little bit of a background beginning now about where we are and what happened. So when COVID started, a group of us were called by the standing committee and asked to think about the governance of the diocese. So this was back in March, April, May. And it was Secretary of Convention, the Chancellor, the bishops, Mrs. Alexander, myself, and perhaps a few others. We sort of put our brains together to see what do we need to do, not only with the canons and Constitution, but what do we need to do with the bylaws, perhaps, of the various organizations within the diocese, the standing committee, the council, etc. How can we put something together that how can we continue to function as a diocese even though we're distributed? And what we found was that our bylaws and our canons and Constitution are extraordinarily robust and give us many, many options. So we haven't had to change anything, perhaps how we operate, but the standing committee, for example, hasn't missed a beat. The council hasn't missed a beat. I assume that the Commission on Ministry, for example, hasn't missed a beat, but rather has been able to continue with the governance functions without any canonical changes. We do have a few that we need to really take a look at and to address. And so the next 7 of these resolutions really are going to take a look at some of the changes that we think we need to make in order to move forward with a clearer governance structure in COVID time, or when we have another weird time. One of the things that we found was that the treasurer's term was for 1 year. Now, you can define 1 year in many different ways, but generally it means 1 year. So the question arises, what do we do when that person isn't replaced within 1 year? Do we have a treasurer or do we not have a treasurer? Now, there's a sort of a rule of thumb in the law. Once upon a time, I was a lawyer many years ago. And that rule of thumb is don't be stupid. It's common sense prevails. So in the middle of a COVID time when we can't get together, of course we have a treasurer, but just in case just in case we wanted to pass this resolution, which would amend our Constitution to make it clear that the treasurer's term of office lasts from election until they're replaced, whether that's within a year or not. It just makes it clear that the term might last for 1 year and 5 days, or as in the case of the treasurer now, 1 year and 3 months. So that's where that came from. Right? Is that fair? For those of you who are on the committee, if I say something that's unfair, please speak up. Likewise, there are a number of other officers who are canonical officers, not constitutional officers. So the treasurer is a constitutional officer. We also have canonical officers. So for example, I'm a canonical officer. My office as chairperson of this committee is based in the canons of the church of the diocese, not in the constitution of the diocese. And the next resolution, 205.3, simply makes it clear that the terms of the canonical officers also run until they are regularly replaced. Okay? No big changes. It simply makes it clear that our terms are the terms of officers of the diocese, and again, that those people who stand on the trustees, that sit on the standing committee, et cetera, that their terms run until they're replaced in some way. Then we're turning to 205.4. This is the heart of our problem. I don't know when or why, but once upon a time, this diocese decided that it was going to be able to have remote meetings of the standing committee, of the trustees, et cetera, but not of the convention itself. And so we wrote into our canons, Canon 33, Section 4, which specifically prohibits us from having a canonical convention online or in any way other than in person. The change to Canon 33 that you see in front of you removes that prohibition and makes it clear that Section 1 and Section 2 of Canon 33 apply to all the ministries of the diocese and not simply those that are named. So Emmanuel Church, where I'm the rector, is a ministry of the diocese. And this makes it clear that Emmanuel Church, any parish, any mission, any committee, any group that finds its authority within the convention is clearly authorized to have meetings online. Are there any questions about that? Yes, Albert, the answer is yes. I think that's a question. Albert Irvin has asked a question in the chat box. Since resolution 205.1 was decided before COVID, is it still robust without the same consideration of term extensions as in resolutions 205.2 and 205.3? I believe that 205.4 answers the question with a yes. That's not true. That's not true. 205.3 answers the question with a yes. That's my understanding. But that's also an Ed question. Julie has a question. Yes. No, Julie asked, do parishes, or I also assume missions, have to amend their bylaws to authorize virtual meetings? And the answer is no. We do not have to amend our bylaws to authorize virtual meetings. However, I would point out, if you have bylaws for your ministry, whether it's a commission or committee of the diocese, or a parish, or a mission, or a nursing home, or a school, or any other entity that finds its core in the diocese, you do need to make sure that your bylaws are either silent before having an online meeting or specifically authorize it. Thank you, Julie. Does that answer your question? And again, I'm channeling Ed here, so please forgive me if I'm giving you incorrect information. The next resolution, 205.5, is what I have lost my words. It's an enabling piece of legislation. What it does is now that, assuming that we change Canon 33 to remove the prohibition on online meetings for the diocese, this allows the diocese to set up rules for such a convention. It doesn't require us to set up rules for such a convention. However, you will notice later today in 205.8, we will show you those rules. So this is simply enables us to make rules for such a convention. Now, the two resolutions that I think that I personally am most interested in as rector of a parish are 205.6 and 205.7. They have some different language, but they have the same goal. The reason they have different language is 205.6 relates to missions, 205.7 relates to parishes. The goal is to allow you to create bylaws for yourselves that would allow you to have annual meetings in a distributed manner. You will notice that the mission councils, excuse me, that's not true. The mission annual meetings have a little bit different language than for the parishes. This is an artifact of the reality that different sorts of work are done in the annual meetings of missions than in parishes. Parish annual meetings, for the most part, unless there's something really weird going on, generally only elect vestry persons and have perhaps courtesy resolutions. But you will see 205.6 would amend Canon 20, specifically Section 3, to allow you to have alternate voting methods for mission annual meetings. You will only have the authority to make these changes without actually, and you can make these bylaw changes under these resolutions without actually having an in-person annual meeting. So you can make the bylaw changes without getting together. You can only make those changes without getting together until the end of 2022. At the end of 2022, if you have not yet made these bylaw changes in your mission bylaws, you will need to have a in-person gathering. Is that clear to everybody? Are there any questions about that for mission council, excuse me, mission annual meetings? 205.7 is exactly the same effect for parishes. It allows you to vote specifically for the vestry elections via distributed mechanisms. It allows you to change your personal, excuse me, not your personal, your parish's bylaws. until December the 31st of 2022. Is that correct? Yes. Without having an annual meeting. Robert Linnell's asking a question. Robert, if you would unmute yourself and ask a question or give me or make a tell me what you mean. Robert?
You're muted, Robert.
I'm asking about compliance with the general statutes regarding nonprofit corporations in the annual meetings. And I'm specifically referring to GS 55A7-01 and 55A-7-08, which fundamentally says that an annual meeting must take place at a place. Currently, the governor signed executive orders which allow us during the COVID emergency declaration to say that virtual meetings will be considered as taking place, via the Zoom. And then there's another statute that goes on to say that during such meetings, all voting must be by written ballot. There can be no show of hands voting or no voice votes.
John, I can take that one, John, if you want.
Yes.
Robert, it's an excellent question, but the diocese nor any of its constituent churches are nonprofit corporations under Chapter 55. The religious corporation, or actually it's called religious societies under Chapter 61.
Okay. All right.
The rules under 55A don't come into effect.
But there are no such similar restrictions in Chapter 61?
No, Chapter 61 basically lets churches run themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Francis Cox, can we have a hybrid annual meeting when we can have an in-person meeting again? Can those who may be homebound or have no transportation available at the time of the meeting? So the answer generally is my understanding, and this is a question, again, an implementation question that I'm going to ultimately refer to the chancellor. My understanding is right now, for the way that I'm interpreting it for myself and for my parish with my chancellor here, is that the answer is yes. That, for example, you can distribute ballots to your membership for vestry elections and collect them in any way you want to, should you write a bylaw allowing you to do that. I am not speaking as to the wisdom of doing such a thing. That's beyond my realm. I have some opinions about that you might be able to discern, but the answer is yes. We live in a very strange time right now, and we don't know when we're all going to be able to get together again. My understanding is that my reading of this is indeed that we will be able to have, I wouldn't say a hybrid annual meeting. The annual meeting would be the actual annual meeting, but you would be able to design your voting processes however you want to, assuming that they are signed off on like any other bylaw changes. Does that make sense? Great. And then our final resolution is simply the initial rules of order that we would propose for a teleconference convention. I'm going to come back to Albert Irvin's question in just a second. We need to have some rules of order in place. We recognize that these are fair, excuse me, I recognize that these are, I think these are a little bare bone, but we won't be able to decide exactly how we're going to run convention until we get to the circumstances of each convention that we need to run by teleconference. We won't know what the technology is until we get to that time. We won't know what the need is until we get to that time, et cetera, et cetera. Is that fair to say, Chuck?
Well, yeah, and these rules were taken largely from the Diocese of Southern Ohio that's already been through this experience once. So we didn't start from scratch. And, you know, it's our best guess at how things would work. I think if we ever do a teleconference, well, I'm sure if we do a teleconference convention, we'll learn stuff and then we'll have to go back and do it slightly differently the next time through. But these rules seem like to us a good starting point.
So Albert Irvin is asking a question about the 2022 limit for 205.6, and I assume 205.7 as well. Excuse me, 205.5 as well.
That's correct. Yes, thank you.
So why did we put a date in which that one paragraph is going to explode, right? We're doing something a little abnormal. Ordinarily, we would ask you to change your bylaws by getting prior permission from the chancellor and the bishop diocesan, and then having an annual meeting where everyone can be in the same room to discuss the wisdom of changing the bylaws. We can't do that now. We're not in a position to have an annual meeting to change your bylaws. In many cases, there are parishes, for example, that have a quorum requirement that's a percentage of your enrolled membership. For us, we need 10% of our enrolled membership. That's almost right smack at 100 people, and we can only have 25 in a room at a time. There's no way, right? So what we thought was we would give people 2 years to make these changes without an annual convention. If we need to, presumably, should you choose not to make those changes within the next 2 years, you're doing so on purpose. And you're running the risk that COVID or anything else is going to be done by the 1st of January 2023. But we thought that doing things out of order, if you will, giving people a 2-year window in order to act out of order would be, or in a manner that would generally be out of order, would be sufficient. Otherwise, we do want, when you change your bylaws, for you to be in a room at an annual meeting and doing so in a way that you have previously decided that you want to do. And if you need, one of the questions that we ask, and I think we sort of said the answer was yes, but we're not going to do it until after the 205th annual convention, is to draft some model bylaws for parishes to use should they so choose. That I am personally wary of diocesan bylaw, of diocese giving parish bylaws. However, I think having a model on which to to have you base your own discussions, we can certainly provide that, but we don't want to do that until after the annual meeting. Excuse me, yes, that's right, until after the annual convention. But be on the lookout for that. I assume through all the standard channels. If you're on Please Note or et cetera, you will probably get some sort of notification that those are printed. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any. Again, a big round of applause and a thank you to Summerlee and to all of you for showing up tonight. I deeply appreciate it. Again, if you have any points of, any suggestions for how to make these clearer, any ideas about typographical errors or errors of disclarity, please send them to Chuck. And he will make them probably after convention. The clerks can do that after convention. Robert is saying, in summary, I sense that all 8 resolutions are recommended for approval. Yes, I think you're right. The committee drafted these, all of these resolutions. Significant help from all the members of the committee. A big shout out and thank you to our chancellor and to our secretary, who brought some real life concerns and some real life answers from other dioceses to us to give us some models. But the committee has drafted these and we stand behind them, and we are going to be moving them forward. Linda says a big thank you to the committee and all that sit on her. You are quite welcome. It was something truly engaging and a wonderful opportunity to serve the diocese in some very interesting times. Anything else? If not, I pray that the Lord is with you this night and wakes you in the morning to further God's ministry in this time and in this place. Bye-bye.